Hello, this is Tony Gaddis, author of Starting Out with Java. In this video, we're going to talk about the pennies for pay problem at the end of Chapter 4. Now, this is a very interesting problem. Would you accept a job where you were paid every day that you worked, and on the first day, you were paid 1 penny, but the employer promised to double your pay every subsequent day? In other words, on the first day, you would get paid 1 penny. And on the second day, you would get paid 2 pennies. On the third day, you would get paid 4 pennies, and then on the fourth day, you would get paid 8 pennies. And your pay would continue to double like this for every day that you work. Well, before you decide whether this is going to be a good deal or not, let's complete this programming problem. In this problem, you're going to write a program that will calculate the amount that you would earn over a specified period of time if you were paid in this fashion. We want the program to display a table showing the salary for each day and then show the total amount of pay that you've earned at the end of the time period. Okay, well, let's design the general algorithm that the program will follow. The first thing that the program will do is get the maximum number of days that we're going to work. We'll just call it max days, and this is simply the number of days that we're going to be working. And I should point out that the problem instructs us not to accept a number less than 1 for the number of days worked. So I'm just going to insert a step here that we should validate max days. We want to make sure that the value that's entered is not less than 1. In a few moments we'll come back and we will expand this into an algorithm that shows us how to validate that. But for the time being, let's just say we're going to validate max days. Now, the general way that this program is going to work is that we will have a loop that will iterate once for each day that we will be working. And as that loop iterates, it will calculate the pay for that day, and it will accumulate the total amount of pay that we've earned so far. So we're going to need some other variables to use through this iteration process. One of the variables that we will need is a variable to simply count the number of days, and we'll call it day count, and we will initialize day count at 1. Each time the loop iterates, it will add 1 to day count, and this will go along with the process of iterating once for each day during the time period. We're also going to need another variable to calculate our pay in pennies. We'll call that pennies, and we're going to initialize that with the value of 1 because on day 1 we earn 1 penny. And then we'll need a third variable. We'll call it total pay, and this is going to be an accumulator that we will use to accumulate the total amount of pay that we've earned. Now, because total pay is going to be used as an accumulator, it's critical that we initialize it to the value 0. If you've read the running total section in your textbook, then you know that accumulators have to be initialized to some starting value, and that starting value is typically 0. That's the case in this program. Okay, now we can write the loop that's going to actually do the most of the work in this program. So the loop, I'm going to use a while loop, and we want this while loop to iterate once for each day that you are going to work. So we're going to say while day count is less than or equal to max days, and then in the body of this loop at the proper point we will increment day count. So this loop will execute once for each day that we're going to work. And just as a reminder, I'm writing pseudocode. I'm not following Java syntax here. We'll translate this into Java later. Okay, so inside the loop, well, for the first iteration, You know, day count here, it's already initialized with the value 1 for that's day 1, and then pennies is initialized with the value 1. That's the pay for day 1. So these values are already set up for day 1. So we should go ahead here, first thing in the loop, and display those values. Display day count and pennies. And of course, in the actual Java code, we will display these in a message that makes sense. But the important thing here is that we need to display the day count and the number of pennies. Next, I'm going to accumulate the amount of pay that we've earned. So we'll say total pay plus equal pennies. And this statement simply adds the value of pennies to the value that is currently in total pay. Now we can start setting things up for the next loop iteration. We need to increment day count, and we also need to double the value of pennies. Pennies times equal to. And then, because we're writing pseudocode, I'll just put a note here that says end while, just so we'll know that all of those things are in the body of the loop. Okay, well, before we continue, let's go back over the steps of this loop one more time just to make sure we understand what's happening. Okay, so the loop says we're going to iterate as long as day count is less than or equal to max days. And the first thing that we're going to do is display the value of day count and the value of pennies. Then we're going to accumulate the pay. We're going to add pennies to total pay. And then, getting ready for the next loop iteration, we increment day count and we double the value of pennies. Now, after the loop has gone through all of its iterations, the last thing that we have to do is display the amount of total pay. Now, you might recall that the program specifies that total pay should be formatted as a dollar amount. In other words, we don't want to simply display the number of pennies. Okay, now let's take a closer look at this part of the algorithm, and that is to validate max days. Once the user has entered a value for max days, then we're told not to accept a number less than 1. Well, we're going to write another while loop that says while max days is less than 1. Recall that the while loop is a pre-test loop, which means that it tests its Boolean expression before each iteration. Now, if the Boolean expression is false to begin with, the while loop will not iterate at all. So this while loop will only iterate if max days is less than 1. And when that's the case, then we're just going to display an error message of some sort. We'll tell the user that they've entered an invalid value. Please enter a value that's 1 or greater, or something like that. And then we will get max days. And that's the end of the while loop. Have I apologized to you about the messiness of my handwriting in some of the other videos? Well, I do apologize. You know, I never got any extra credit in school for neat handwriting. So hopefully you can read most of what I've written here. Okay, well, I think we've gone over the algorithm pretty thoroughly. A few little details here and there we may need to add. So let's switch over to the editor and look at the actual Java code. Well, here's the code, and first I have the necessary import statements. I'm going to use a scanner object to get keyboard input, so I've got an import statement for the scanner class. In order to format the total pay as a dollar amount, I'm going to use the decimal format class. I'll create an instance of that class for the output formatting. My public class is named Pennies for Pay, and then here's the beginning of the main method. In the main method, I've declared 4 variables. Pennies, which is going to hold the number of pennies for each day. Total pay, which is my accumulator for the total amount of pay. Max days, that's going to hold the maximum number of days that we're going to work. And then day count, which is the day counter. Because I'm using a scanner object for keyboard input, I have to actually create an object. So this statement creates the scanner object. And then the next thing is to get the maximum number of days from the user. So just display the message for how many days will you work. And then we read an integer using the scanner object and assign that to max days. Now we need to validate that max days is not less than 1. So this is the while loop that does the input validation while max days is less than 1. Of course, if max days is a valid value, if it's 1 or greater, this loop will be skipped. It won't iterate at all. But if it is less than 1, then we get this error message. The number of days must be at least 1. And then we get this message, enter the number of days. And once again, we read an integer from the keyboard and we assign it to max days. So when the program is running, once it gets past this loop, we know that max days contains a valid value. Now we're going to initialize all those variables to the correct starting values. Day count, we initialize it to 1 for day 1. Pennies, we initialize it to 1. That's the number of pennies we will have earned on day 1. Total pay, that's our accumulator for the total pay. We initialize it to 0. Also in the program, this is not something that I did in the pseudocode, but I've got some statements here that display a report header. We're going to display a table that in one column has the day number, and in the next column has the number of pennies that we've earned for that particular day. And you'll notice that I've got a couple of tabs inserted there. And then this last print line call just displays these dashes so that it looks like a report header. And now we have the while loop that does the calculation, while day count less than or equal to max days. And this is very much like the pseudocode that we wrote. We display day count, we tab over, and we display the number of pennies. Then we accumulate the number of pennies, just add that to total pay. We increment day count, and then we double the value of pennies. The last thing that we do is display the total amount of pay, but we're going to format that. So here we create an instance of the decimal format class. We name it $, and here's the formatting mask that we use to get numbers formatted as dollar amounts. And then the last statement is simply the statement that displays the total pay. And one thing I need to mention, I don't believe we went over this in the pseudocode, but total pay is the number of pennies. Well, we want to display a dollar amount, not the number of pennies. So the value that I'm going to display is total pay divided by 100. That'll give us the dollar amount. Okay, well, let's compile and execute this program. Okay, the program compiles with no errors, so let's run the program and let's see what we would be paid for 5 days work. Here's the table that shows days 1 through 5 and the pennies that were paid at the end of each day. And as you can see, the numbers of pennies do double for each day. And then at the end of the 5th day, Wow, we've been paid a total of 31 cents. That doesn't sound like a lot of money for 5 days work. I don't know. I don't know if we should keep this job, but let's run the program again and let's see what our pay would be if we just stick with it for 15 days. Well, here's the table for days 1 through 15 and the pay at the end of each day, and you can see that the total is $327.67. Okay, well that's a little better, but you know, that doesn't sound like a lot of money for 15 days work. I'm thinking we should quit this job. What do you think? Well, okay, well let's see what we would have if we just stick with the job for 30 days. So we get a table that shows the values for days 1 through 30, and then wow, something dramatic has happened to the pay. We've earned a total of over $10 million. Okay, well I think maybe we should keep this job. That sounds pretty good. Well, thanks for sticking with me as we work through the logic of this program. I hope you enjoyed it.